ahead and press. Great. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to join us today on such a beautiful evening. Welcome to our May 2022 MUNI Summit, or also known as Municipal Light Plant Summit. My name is Logan Malik, and I am the Clean Energy Director at the Massachusetts Climate Action Network. And in this role, one of my primary responsibilities is working with municipal light plants and especially the advocates in municipal light plant communities to support them in transitioning to a clean and just energy future. And that is very much so on topic for tonight. Our MUNI Summit is going to discuss how MLPs or municipal utilities can advance energy and environmental justice. And as I'm sure you all know, and I'm sure you all agree, this is an incredibly important topic, and one that we continue to need to center and to ensure that our work is grounded in many of the energy and environmental justice principles. But of course, in order to do that, we first need to understand exactly what that is and how we exactly go about that. And that is what we are here to discuss today with our wonderful group of panelists. We have some great speakers with excellent expertise who are going to talk with us about exactly how we can go about addressing and advancing energy and environmental justice. So just a few quick things before we go ahead. I know you should have come in muted, and I don't think you have the ability to unmute yourself, but in the event that you do, please just make sure that you stay muted for the duration of the presentations, just so that we can ensure that things move forward smoothly. If you haven't already done so, feel free to just put your name and the town that you're calling in from in the chat, just so that we know where folks are calling in from on this beautiful day. Additionally, I know that there are plenty of folks who wanted to join us, but who could not. So that is why we are recording this webinar. And as I mentioned at the top, if you feel uncomfortable, having your video on, just go ahead and turn that off, and that way you can ensure that you are out of the recording. So I am going to break down the agenda and all of that stuff. But before I do, I just want to say a little bit about MCAN and who we are. We are a nonprofit organization with over 65 chapters across the state. And we really view our role as a facilitator of municipal level climate action. We really try to empower local chapters and local groups by enhancing communication, promoting town level projects that improve communities, and supporting local efforts to combat the climate crisis. For us, it is all about local action. That's really where we believe most of the power for change comes from. And that, of course, includes municipal light plant communities that have the amazing privilege to have their energy be, operated and owned and to really be governed in their communities. And that's one of the reasons why we love to work in these communities. And so that is really what MCAN is all about, and why we seek to conduct these summits, to make sure that folks are learning more about what action they can take and exactly kind of what options are available to them in community and in this local community action space. And so towards that end, we have a wonderful and packed agenda. We are going to kick things off by just getting a little bit of a broader framework and understanding of what is environmental justice and what is energy injustice. We're then going to kind of dig in a little bit more and talk specifically about MLPs and what does it look like, addressing environmental and energy justice in MLP communities, municipal utility communities specifically. We're then going to have a brief presentation on the impact that MLP decisions have had in the past and could continue to have in local communities. And then we're going to finish up by talking about really step by step, what actions can or could MLPs take to address issues of justice. Following that, we will have a Q&A session, that should be 20 minutes long. Hopefully we can actually make it a little bit longer depending on how efficient we are with our time, but we really want to take as many questions as we can and make sure that we're digging into the substance as much as possible. And so towards that end, you will be able to unmute yourself during the Q&A period. But if you have questions along the way, and as folks are presenting, feel free to just drop them in the chat, and I will do my best to get to as many of them as I possibly can in the Q&A period. And so with that, I am going to go ahead and kick things off by passing it over to Johannes Epke. And Johannes is a staff attorney at the Conservation Law Foundation. She works in transportation, environmental justice, and climate resilience. Johannes brings a diverse legal, political, and organizing experience to bear in this discussion and in her work. Prior to joining CLF, she was involved in a number of different environmental and social justice campaigns in New York, California, and in Massachusetts. And she actually got her start initially working in environmental law and air pollution, energy, and environmental justice out in California. And so with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Johannes.
Thank you so much, Logan. Such a pleasure to be here. I'm talking about my previous career in environmental law. I think back very fondly to the early days I spent just out of law school at the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment in San Francisco, a great environmental justice organization out there. And really glad to be doing this kind of work again after a little bit of a hiatus in election reform. So thank you everyone for joining tonight. This is obviously a crucial topic and a very timely one. Racial justice and environmental justice are hot topics right now, and there's a lot that we need to and can be doing. So thank you. My name is Johannes Epke. As Logan said, I'm a staff attorney at Conservation Law Foundation. CLF is a full suite environmental organization with offices in the 6 New England states. I am based here in Massachusetts in the Boston office. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with some really basic stuff, some definitions. Sorry, my motion sensor light will go off. I'll just leave that as it is. This is a really basic definition that is pretty common. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. There are a bunch of different definitions, but this has a few of those core elements that we're looking at here. Fair treatment and meaningful involvement, I will pull those two out as separate elements. The fair treatment being fair outcomes and meaningful involvement being sort of a more procedural piece. And so we'll talk more about procedure and outcomes later. And then those characteristics listed at the bottom, race, color, national origin, or income, those aren't always exactly the same ones that we're looking at, but we're talking about the fact that environmental burdens and benefits are very easy to measure based on some other proxies, race and income being 2 really key ones. Next slide, please. So I pulled this screenshot from, I don't know if any of you watched John Oliver last week tonight. He's got a funny weekly show, and he did a great focus on environmental racism just a few weeks ago. And I think it's important to note that environmental racism is one definition, environmental classism is another, and environmental justice is really meant to cover those various elements. And the graphic or the slide on the side of him makes a really important point about why race is an important factor, as is income. It shows there that Black Americans earning $200,000 a year are exposed to as much or more it's fine particulate pollution in this particular case as white Americans earning $25,000 per year. A lot of folks think, environmental justice, oh, sure, like you live in a poor neighborhood, there is going to be more pollution there. It's sort of intuitive to a lot of folks. The racial aspect is less intuitive to folks, and I think it's important to show that even adjusting for income, that there is a vastly disproportionate effect on people of color in this country and Black people. Next slide, Logan. So Massachusetts passed a definition for environmental justice populations just last year, and here are the elements here that they're looking at. So the first one is income, no more than 65% of statewide annual median household income. The second is minorities comprise 40% or more of the population. The third is English language proficiency, and the fourth is sort of a combination of income and race. And the reason that we use these definitions is to capture an appropriate percentage and the right populations in Massachusetts to focus environmental justice concern on. And again, the reason for these proxies is that we don't know exactly where the pollution is. It's hard to track these things. We don't have air quality monitoring all over the place. But race and income are incredibly effective proxies for figuring out where there is more pollution and where there is less access. So the populations that are identified here are much more likely to face environmental burdens and be less well served by environmental benefits. So that's clean public transportation versus a highway running through your backyard. So I'll pause here. I'm going to put a link in the chat. This is, if you want to go deeper on what the principles behind environmental justice are, I'm dropping a link here. These are the Jaqueline principles for democratic organizing that were decided on by a group of folks working on environmental justice more than 20 years ago and have been really foundational. So if you're interested in doing a little more reading, that's a good place to learn more about some of the history and principles behind environmental justice. Next slide, Logan. So I don't know if you probably can't read this. There's a link at the bottom that I could add for folks if you want to look here, but talking about the meaningful involvement piece, the procedural piece. So one aspect to get to better outcomes is to ensure that everybody has a seat at the table. And this scale here or ladder of involvement or community involvement shows that there are a lot of different steps along the way. So from the far left to the right, they are ignore, inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and defer to. And so if you think about when you're making a decision as a municipal light plant, for example, those most burdened by the pollution of the power plant that your power is coming from, or those served by the electricity that you are providing, how much involvement do those folks have in the decision-making process? Most investor-owned utilities, it's going to be almost entirely ignore on all of those. The more community involved entities might have some inform and consult processes and policies in place. Involvement and collaboration are much less common, and deferring to the served community is all the way up there and very rarely achieved. Now, this isn't meant to shame or chide anybody or any entities that are not high on this ladder, but just to give a sense of what it would take to move up into the next category, the next tier, and have more involvement. And involvement in the procedural justice is a core aspect in and of itself, and also is essential to lead to better outcomes. And I will hold my tongue a little bit on the outcomes that I hope we get to talk about tonight, because I know that my fellow panelists will have more to say on that. A few things very briefly. The environmental justice population definition in Massachusetts is available in map form if you're interested in seeing the distribution of those populations around the state. You can see, if there are environmental justice population designations in your MLP territory or in your city or town, to get a sense of where those populations are and how to reach out to them and have them more involved. Next slide, Logan. So turning specifically to energy justice, I'd say there's a lot of overlap in environmental justice and energy justice here. Specifically, some components that I wanted to pull out to identify: energy democracy, that's the procedural part, who decides, who has power. And a key component of that for MLPs is the structure and bylaws or governing documents, the governance of the entity. I know a lot of MLPs are 3 or 5 member elected boards, and not a ton of flexibility. That is a statutory scheme that can be modified, but obviously, like, district elections is not something that a lot of MLPs are contemplating here for better energy democracy. And then benefits and burdens, again, here the benefits for energy is access, right? Who benefits from the decisions around energy? And most people think about having access all the time, but there are some crucial times when access to energy is not a guarantee. So, for example, shutoffs. Somebody doesn't pay a bill or doesn't respond in a timely manner. To have your energy cut off is a if you don't have access to electricity, you are not benefiting from that system. Similarly, with storms and discontinuation of service or disruption of service, we know that that environmental justice populations are often the last to have their electricity restored, and so ensuring that there is equitable access there to make sure that folks have their power turned back on in a fair way. And then in addition to the benefits, of course, the burdens. So the cost of electricity, whether that is distributed fairly, and the pollution associated with the generation of electricity, whether that is distributed fairly. And we can get into the distribution of pollution inside or outside of the MLP territory later. I think I just have one more slide very briefly before I turn it back to you, Logan. Yeah, this is a picture of the Palmer plant, and I know that other my co-panelists will have more to say about this, but I just wanted to note that this is one of those burden situations where if you look at this picture closely, you can see at the bottom there, those are houses. There's a rendering there, of course, but this is a modification of a satellite photo or an aerial photo, where you can see along the bottom there that is the edge of a neighborhood that this power plant has been proposed to be built across the street from, and they would be the front line breathing in the emissions from this incredibly polluting facility. And so they would obviously be bearing the brunt of that burden. I think I will, in the interest of time, pass it back to you, Logan, and reserve some time for the Q&A later. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Johannes, and looking forward to hearing you speak to some of the ideas about outcomes and where we hope to go in the Q&A section. But I appreciate your efficiency on the time side. So our next speaker is Mira Bijani. Mireille is the Energy Justice Director at the Community Action Works, and in this role, they have been a really great partner with MCAN over the past year and more on a number of different campaigns, but especially the effort that we have been working on to raise concerns that the community of Peabody has with respect to the community, the peaking power plant that is being proposed there. So before joining Action Works, Mireille spent 2 years with the Green Corps, which is the field field school for environmental organizing. And during those years, they actually had an opportunity to work on several different campaigns, some of which were related to municipal utilities in other states. Specifically, they worked to get the Sacramento Municipal Utility District to declare a climate emergency. So with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to you, Mira.
Thanks so much, Logan, and good evening, everyone. Great to see so many folks here to talk about this crucial issue as Johannes laid out. And thanks, Johannes, for that great overview of what is environmental justice and energy justice. And I know there's the phrases that we throw around a lot, and it's really good to remind ourselves of like what at the core those words actually mean. And I'm gonna take that kind of the next step and talk about addressing environmental and energy justice through MLPs, through our municipal light plants. What does it look like for those entities to be prioritizing these issues? Next slide, Logan. So I first want to start by talking about justice as in terms of organizational culture, because everything starts with how an organization approaches its work. The actual decisions and policies that are put in place only go so far if the folks working at an entity or an organization aren't really embracing the kind of ethos and culture behind why those decisions are the ones that are being made, why those policies are the right ones to prioritize. And a lot of this ties into what Johannes was just laying out, where, so these are some buzzwords that I'm gonna dig into a little bit more. First of all, democracy. As Johannes mentioned, a lot of MLPs are elected boards of 3 to 5 folks or are appointed by elected officials in their municipality. And I think in a lot of communities, that for a long time has kind of been overlooked. It's not necessarily an election that folks are paying really close attention to, or a position that people are really monitoring, who is on our light board. And I think for both residents of those communities and members of those light boards, high turnout and high participation in that election should be something to strive for and a point of pride, that people are really actively engaging in what their energy decisions are going to look like in their community. And folks on those light boards are wanting to be elected by a majority of their constituents, as opposed to being, reelected to a 4th, 5th term by a handful of residents who are checking that box on the ballot. So I think really emphasizing that this is a position that should genuinely represent the community that's being served through people actively participating in that democratic process. And then there's the question of accessibility and making sure that this is both in terms of like actual procedure and content. So making sure that meetings are at times when members of the public, especially folks who, work like, maybe multiple jobs or have children, can attend. And yes, Judith pointed out, this picture is an example I'm going to talk about for accessibility and engagement, having community meetings that people can attend in the evening, providing support for folks to really be able to show up and ask questions and have their voice heard. And the key part of that accessibility is also making sure that the conversation is being had in a way that people can understand, where we're not, it's really easy in the energy world to slip into jargon and acronyms and alphabet soup. I know a number of community members I've worked with try to wade into the world of MLPs and are immediately running into, the lists of acronyms of, MLP and ISO New England and MWIC and and all the things. And like, what does all of this mean? And so the more we can really make sure that we're presenting things in terms that people can understand without, people aren't dumb about, how energy works. They understand the general concepts and stuff. So it's without being condescending about it, but really actively have, and having a dialogue, what, if I say this, does this make sense to you? What part of this doesn't, resonate with how you understand our energy system, or what questions do you have about this? And really being proactive about that. Transparency is a key part of this as well, making sure that when decisions are made, the public knows about that, that agendas for MLP meetings are posted, that minutes are posted, that there's a clear thread that folks can follow if they want to dig into what is happening, what's the next step here, etc. So it doesn't take a lot of digging to understand how things have unfolded. Engagement. So this is, in addition to accessibility, making sure that they're like the table exists or that folks can sit at. It's actually actively inviting people to sit at the table, because if people don't know that a meeting is happening, if people don't know that a process is underway, then it's hard for them to participate. And so really, being proactive, knocking on doors, going to where that, in organizing, we talk about meeting people where they're at. So really finding the places that people are, whether it's at the public library or at the local church or whatever else, really going out and making sure that the members of the community know what, role the MLP plays, what big decisions are coming up that the MLP wants some public input on, etc. So that it's a give and take. And then lastly, accountability is, our MLPs are public entities. They serve the community. So making sure all these other pieces of having that democratic process, having accessibility and transparency and all of that lead to more of a feedback loop where the public can hold decision makers accountable when, things are heading in the wrong direction. That's a key loop that needs to exist in order to make sure that we're making the right decisions for our community's health and future. And as Judith pointed out, this picture is from the community meeting in Peabody that was held around the Peabody Peaker plant by MWIC, the folks proposing that facility. And it was the first community meeting in the process of this project being built, about 6 years into the development process. And so definitely the kind of thing that would be ideal to have sooner in the process to really answer questions, have that kind of open dialogue. Next slide, Logan. So once that culture is in place and folks are really thinking about how all those pieces need to be part of the day-to-day operations of the organization, then you carry out energy and environmental justice through decisions made and policies implemented. And MLPs have a lot of authority over the things, programs and rates, et cetera. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And so they can craft more just policies easily and adjust more nimbly in a lot of cases than investor-owned utilities. So we're going to talk a little bit about how they can reduce energy burden, which, as Johannes mentioned, is the cost of energy and the pollution that comes with it. They can shape investments in where we're headed next with our energy system, and really craft a vision for the future. Next slide. So first of all, the ability to reduce energy burden, or the cost, or both monetarily or health-wise, that falls on communities. MLPs can adjust their rate changes without approval from the DPU. So it's generally a more, an easier process than for other kinds of utilities. And that means that they can more easily adapt to what the community is needing, and lower costs for the most vulnerable communities, provide discounts to lower income communities or environmental justice neighborhoods. They can also be more lenient in turning off people's lights. There's more flexibility in when that cutoff is, when bills aren't being paid, and that ties into the energy access part that Johannes was mentioning as well. And they can also put together funds or programs for folks who are struggling to keep the lights on, to support that financial burden for folks and make sure that they have access to this really key need in our communities. You know, if you don't have power, a lot is lost in that. And often, you know, it can relate to health equipment or just general well-being. So making sure that folks are able to continue to have access and that it's not too expensive for them to continue to have access is really important. And something that MLPs have that flexibility and authority to adjust to what their community is needing in the moment. Next slide. All right. They also, another point that's kind of unique about MLPs is that they can, unlike investor-owned utilities, they can own their own energy generation facilities. And that means that they can decide where to invest in certain kinds of, you know, whether to build a new gas power plant or a new, you know, wind farm or solar farm or something like that. So really investing in what kinds of energy generation facilities they want to own, deciding to prioritize clean energy generation, and that, you know, steers the direction of our grid in that way, and also reduces energy burden by reducing pollution, because a lot of new energy infrastructure is often built in these environmental justice communities that are already overburdened. And so that in turn enhances environmental justice, because we're not putting a new source of pollution in a community that's already dealing with toxic sites and air pollution and all the other pieces. And so that, you know, deciding what to invest in or not, if they're, you know, in their own generation facilities, in their portfolio, and then also in, you know, if a project is brought to them, they can say, yeah, you know, this lines up with our justice priorities, or it doesn't, and because, you know, it's in an environmental justice community, and we don't want to build a new fossil fuel project in a community that's already dealing with enough of those kinds of things. Next slide. All right, and then there's also the ability to craft a just energy future. So I've covered a number of ways MLPs have less regulation than investor-owned utilities, so they can kind of be a little bit more flexible, more nimble, change course more easily without having to go through regulatory proceedings. They also have smaller scale operating areas, which again contributes to that flexibility. They don't, you know, trying something is often not a little bit easier if your area that you have to put it in, you know, put it into action is smaller. You don't have to cover as many customers with a new idea, a new policy, a new rate structure, et cetera. So there's a lot of potential for creativity and just trying new things, seeing what works out. So that's where this kind of putting together flexibility, autonomy, and vision leads to this ability for MLPs to really pioneer climate solutions, to be at the leading edge of where we're going next and re-envisioning how our energy grid works. Because I think we all know at this point that we can't just keep going with business as usual on the way we've been generating and transmitting and distributing energy. We need to really rethink not just what kind, you know, how we're generating it, but also how we get it from one place to another, how we charge people for the structure, you know, the way the energy system works. And so MLPs, I think of as this really exciting, you know, kind of potential to be a lab for cool ideas for, you know, one community to say, let's try this. And, you know, if it doesn't work, that's okay. We can try something else. But, you know, a little bit of trial and error and being really leaders in discovering new ways to pull together how our energy works. And then kind of the flip side to that is that more flexibility means more responsibility. And, you know, MLPs, because they have less oversight, less regulation from the state government and state agencies, there's a risk of them perpetuating an unjust system if they aren't actively thinking about how to prioritize energy and environmental justice. If this isn't part of an MLP's, you know, culture and decision making, and then the status quo by default is perpetuating environmental injustice. And that's where it's, you know, there needs to be some conscious effort put into incentivizing reducing burden, increasing access, et cetera. And not prioritizing justice has substantial costs on communities. As we are, you know, Jackie's going to talk more about the Springfield biomass plant and pipe, you know, what that looks like, what that has looked like in Springfield, or Johannes mentioned the Palmer biomass plant. And then in Peabody, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, where they're building a new gas power plant in the middle of an environmental justice community and within a few miles of several other environmental justice communities, because this way of thinking of environmental and energy justice wasn't a part of the decision-making process for that facility. And that has led to a community that already has significant air pollution burdens and other toxic sites nearby is now dealing with another piece of infrastructure that theoretically is going to be around for several decades, polluting the air nearby. And so this picture is from an action that actually just took place last week with 100 people from across the state coming out and saying, we don't want more fossil fuels. We don't want to keep burning stuff in communities where people are already breathing dirty air. And so there's a lot, that a lot of responsibility MLPs have to hold themselves accountable and be heading in the right direction. And as I said, be that kind of that innovation space for really exciting new ideas. And with that, I will hand it over to Logan.
Great. Thank you so much, Mireille. That was a really good overview of kind of the policy context that municipal utilities find themselves in. So our next speaker is Jaqueline Velez. Jackie is an organizer and advocate who lives in the city of Springfield, Massachusetts, with her 2 children. In her professional role as the racial justice organizer at Jobs with Justice, she worked in collaboration on stopping the biomass power plant with the Springfield Climate Justice Coalition, and has supported labor and union fights out in Western Massachusetts and across the state. Prior to her role, Jackie spent over 12 years in various different organizing and advocacy roles, including serving as the lead organizer for Neighbor to Neighbor in Holyoke, as well as the regional organizing director for Senator Ed Markey's re-election campaign in 2018. We are really grateful to have you, Jackie, and I will go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thanks, Logan. We actually met when we were on the campaign trail for Morris and Markey. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Can you hear me? I have a fan in the background. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. I moved here in 2015. I have 2 children. My daughter at the time was 19 and my son was going on 3 years old. One of the main reasons that I moved here is because I didn't want my son to grow up chasing buses, chasing trains, no green space, having to travel really far to go to a park. But I was scared to move to the state because I am a formerly incarcerated woman, and I know that, formerly incarcerated individuals get discriminated against when it comes to employment, housing opportunities. So I was scared, but I still, bit the bullet, as they say, and I made it out here. And I'm grateful I did. I think we all did better once we moved here. Prior to moving here, I was an advocate for criminal justice reform. I worked with an organization for about 7 years on issues like the anti-shackling law, so women would not be shackled during labor while in prison, raising the age of criminal responsibility, domestic violence law for domestic violence survivors and things like that. When I moved here, I was looking for that same criminal justice type of work. I found it in Neighbor to Neighbor. But after the criminal justice omnibus bill passed, I believe in 2018, we had to kind of move on to other things. And one of those things happened to be a pipeline, a proposed pipeline from Agawam to Holyoke. It was 6 miles in length. It was going to be increased in size. It was going to pump more gas into, bring more gas into Holyoke. But with the help of the coalition, with representatives from East Hampton, Northampton, Holyoke, Long Meadow, East Long Meadow, Springfield, and West Springfield, through various panels, testifying in front of the Board of Health, the Conservation Commission, Sustainability. I think it's the Sustainability and Conservation Commission. We actually were able to stop that. We were told that we needed about 50 signatures to get the attention of the council. We collected 350 signatures instead. We passed a resolution, which you know, as many of you may know, is not legally binding, with the help of former city councilors Josie Valentin and Rebecca Lisi. They championed the resolution. It passed. At some point, they were pissed at us. The mayor was opposed to that, to us fighting against it. Obviously, Holyoke Gas and Electric was opposed to it, but at some point when Columbia Gas was responsible for exploding, you know, the explosions in the Merrimack Valley, which included Lawrence, North Andover, and Andover, we decided to do something. The day that the Northampton City Council was passing their resolution unanimously, we marched to Holyoke Gas and Electric, and then to the mayor's office. Eventually, the mayor, you know, kind of supported us, decided that was the right thing to do. And so, you know, that deal fell apart. There was an MOU between Columbia Gas and Holyoke Gas and Electric, and it fell apart after that. I did not do that single-handedly, by the way. I wanted to bring a special advocate into the room. I didn't know anything about environmental justice or climate justice. I was a prison reform advocate. When in 2017, when Puerto Rico was ravaged by 2 hurricanes, and my beautiful island of Puerto Rico is still recovering from that to this day, that's what changed my view on environmental justice and climate justice. I looked at that fight as if that was the fight over there. That's not my fight, but it totally is. And that's how I kind of made that connection. I realized it was everybody's fight and we all had to do something. So we got it done. And it was amazing because it was advocates and organizing, you know, with people that were white, people that were Latino. Holyoke is a very, you know, mixed city, but we were able to do that with both sides, right? Like people on both sides of, you know, of that. Then about 3.5 years ago, I moved to Springfield and I found out about the biomass wood burning power plant. And I'm like, here we go again. But, you know, the 2 advocates and organizers I mentioned were Susan Thiberge and the late great Marty Nathan. I'm sure many of you have heard the name before. Everything I learned was from these 2 women. And they pulled me into that fight. And along with Mireille, Johannes, PFPI, the Springfield Climate Justice Coalition, we got some things done, but I now have a mortgage. So I've been here almost 4 years. You know, it's safe to say I might be here another 26 years. But last year, my daughter, my now 27-year-old, was diagnosed with asthma. And my 9-year-old, I'm afraid for because 1 in 5 children here have asthma in Springfield. And that just seems to me like an injustice, right? And it's sad because I feel like I moved here to give my son green space, nature, and I have to worry about these invisible threats that we're constantly facing and fighting. You know, you win one campaign and you turn around and there's something else that you have to tackle. And everyone has to play a part in that, right? Whether you work on just EJ issues solely or not, right? Even if you get paid to do that or not, it just seems to me that it is all of our duty to do. I took some notes, which I didn't even use, but with all these, like with us facing all these threats and challenges, now more than ever, we have to fight against these things. We have to be creative. We have to think outside the box. We have to engage the community and the people that are going to be directly impacted. But what really boggles my brain is the fact that we can stop a fight when an environmental justice community is on the receiving end of the pollution, right? But that pollution cannot be contained. Wherever you put it, it's still gonna spread and it's still gonna affect everyone in the state. So I think everyone needs to be concerned about that and work together in order to find solutions, because we really do not have any time left. I remember when we were working on the Holyoke pipeline, the IPCC report released around that time was like, oh, you have 10 to 12 years. And I think a lot of people, you know, leaned on that thinking we have that much time. 10 years really passes by quickly. You see my baby here as an infant and he's already 10. I don't even know where the years went, but this recent IPCC report is letting us know that we have less time than that, much less. So I think, you know, we all need to do something, and, you know, there's plenty of people that are awakening to the fact that this is real. And, you know, I implore that everyone does something about it and let other people know that they can open their eyes to this horrible tragedies that we're all facing. I'm sorry, Logan, I'm done.
Oh, great, great. I wanted to just make sure. But thank you so much for that, Jackie. And I think you're spot on that it really is, it has to be a team effort. It has to be everyone from all different sides, all different shapes, colors, creeds, etc., and all different positions as far as what we do in our professional lives. And I do appreciate also just painting the picture of the various different fights that you have had to you know, combat in the Pioneer Valley, and I don't think that that story is, unfortunately, you know, unique. I think it's something that we see far too often in you know, in various different communities across the state and across the country. So thank you so much for that. And I do just want to conclude our speaking period, our presentations, just by briefly talking about directly. So we've talked about kind of what is environmental and energy justice. What does that look like in MLPs? What are the impacts that has? Now let's talk about steps that can actually be taken. And some of these steps have already been mentioned before. But I think it's helpful to kind of really just list out, you know, what are some options that are available to municipal utilities and to residents living in those communities. I do just want to add a caveat. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but hopefully it does get you thinking about what you could do in your community as a light commissioner, as a resident who cares about these issues, as a general manager or a staff member at a utility. And so I'm gonna go for 5 separate actions that can be taken. And the first one, and I think that this is a pretty straightforward one, but just developing an environmental justice statement, policy, or commitment. That's the first piece. The second piece, as has been emphasized, and I want to emphasize it again, in partnership with residents. And I think this is something we're really excited to see, and we're seeing more of it. Just last week, I believe it was last week, Shrewsbury, the Shrewsbury Electric Celco passed an environmental justice resolution. And I know that there are several other municipal utilities that are looking at this. And I think this is a really important step to just clarify and clearly state, you know, that this is an issue that matters and that has to be addressed from an institutional and governance standpoint. As far as these statements, policies, or commitments are concerned, just a few things to note, because the devil is always in the details. And I think from MCAN's perspective, what we're really looking at when we see this is, you know, as far and, as prescriptive as it can and descriptive as it possibly can be, the better. The more descriptive and prescriptive, the better. If there are clear and tangible action items that can come from this, that can come from a statement or a policy and the commitment, that is ideally what we really, really value and what we really want to see. The second piece that I think is worth just mentioning is the extent to which the policy is ingrained in the actual governance structure. So, having a statement is a really powerful start, but the more that you can integrate it, say, into the governing documents, into the bylaws, so that it really is a fundamental piece of how your municipal utility operates, I think that that is really ideal. And that ensures that nothing gets overlooked and that this is really a systematic piece of everything that is done at the municipal utility level. The second piece that was there, in partnership with community and in partnership with your residents, that is also just so incredibly important. When it comes down to it, it is your community that knows best how to address the challenges that they're facing. It is your community that knows what they prioritize, what they care about, and what they want to see addressed. It is so critical that that as you're developing these statements and these policies and these commitments, make sure that the most vulnerable folks, the folks who stand to benefit and be served by this, are at the table, so that their needs and their interests are adequately reflected in the policy and the resolution, the statement that you end up putting forward. And I just wanted to highlight this. This is from San Diego, and they're kind of outlining the engagement process that they are planning for an environmental justice element. It's a piece of one of their policies, and they really kind of outline the fact that they're going to first start by surveying the community. They're going to then, craft a clear engagement plan whereby residents understand what the next steps are. Then they're going to identify focus neighborhoods that, they really want to make sure are involved in the discussion, and then draft policies in connection with those community residents. And as well as provide substantial opportunities to review those policies before they are adopted. I think that, of course, this is a larger community, but the level of engagement, I think that this is really the direction that we should be moving in our municipal utility communities, is making sure that there's not just one, there's not just two, but there are multiple and ample opportunities for residents to have a say in the policies that are put forth. And I know it takes time, but this is the work that is involved with addressing and advancing environmental and energy justice. The second piece, Mireille touched on this in some detail, so I won't belabor it, but you do just want to say reducing energy burden for vulnerable communities. This is something that we know several MLPs are already doing. And they're doing it in a number of ways, providing low income discounts, providing discounts for vulnerable communities like the elderly community residents in your community, providing financial assistance to organizations like CAP agencies, and also creating various different programs to support low income residents if they are having trouble paying their bills. These are all steps that we see as really positive and important in ensuring that the energy burden is reduced for vulnerable communities. And one thing I do just want to add here, MLPs do an excellent job at keeping their rates very low. And so, some might say, well, hey, we're already so much lower than the rest of the state. Why do we need a low income discount? And I think as things move forward and, we're seeing a lot of MLPs restructure their rates to better accommodate and better address climate issues, I think that those discounts are going to become increasingly important. And, there may be times where rates do increase in order to address the climate crisis. And it's just really important to make sure that the burden of those increases do not disproportionately fall on low income residents. And that's why, you know, a discount like this is valuable, because you have it in place. So from an institutional standpoint, you're ensuring that you know your most vulnerable residents are protected. Just briefly, you know, this energy burden is something that certainly affects the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It probably is to a lesser extent in municipal utilities, but you know, when you look at this map, you know, all across the state, low income households are paying disproportionately more already. They're paying more than 10%. So you look at this low income map versus the statewide average, and you see that this energy burden is here. It is affecting our communities now. And so, you know, in the future, it will become probably maybe more important, but it is a valuable tool to have in place now. And I will just say, low income residents, you know, there is an opportunity for creativity, thinking about who is vulnerable among your residents. You know, is it the elderly community? Are there specific renters or you know, residents living in various different facilities? I think that there is an opportunity to get creative here in thinking about where and who those discounts apply to. The third consideration is consider the justice implications when developing policies and making investment decisions. And I think Mireille, you know, really outlined this. Is, you know, if you just look at the price, and if you just look at, you know, how it would fit into the power portfolio, something might look like a very good investment. And you look at it and say, hey, let's go for this. This makes sense financially. But if you don't consider the environmental justice implications up front, you do end up with situations like Palmer and like Peabody, where residents, community members, you know, are not necessarily happy with the direction that the municipal utility made. And I don't think that this was an issue of municipal utilities saying, oh, we're just going to go for it. You know, I think it was probably a prioritization of cost. And, you know, so that is why there is real value in upfront considering the environmental justice implications, so that you understand and you can factor that into your decision making before you sign that contract, before you move forward with a particular policy. And I will also just say, this doesn't just extend to those investments in energy facilities, but thinking about what are the impacts of this new energy efficiency policy that we're moving forward. What about this, this new rate that we're really excited to try out? Having an institutionalized approach to addressing and considering the justice implications of these policies and programs is really valuable, and it adds to the MLP upfront, we feel. And these are, you know, two examples that I mentioned. So the fourth one, and this is a really interesting one, probably not one that we would discuss in other communities, but as a step, taking on the community's fair share of burden in the transition to a clean energy future. Please excuse the typo, but taking on the fair share of the community's fair share of burden in the transition to a clean energy future. You know, I think that this one is fascinating because it requires folks living and operating in municipal utilities to take a step back and consider, you know, the context that we're operating with it in, outside of the confines of their district. You know, MLPs are incredibly individualized, and they, you know, really work to serve their community members. But at the same time, they exist in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They exist in the region, you know, that is served by ISO New England. So, you know, what they do and the share that they take on has an impact on these various different context that we exist in. And, you know, one thing that we do notice is, and this is not the case with every MLP, but with some MLPs, you know, they have a significantly at times higher median income than other parts of the state, and certainly than the median income of the state. And so when you're thinking about taking action on climate, it is an energy and environmental justice, and I will get to it in a second, but a climate justice issue to make sure that those communities that have the resources to are really taking, you know, doing their fair share on the climate crisis and on on transitioning to a clean energy future. And I really think that this is an interesting one as well, because we might not discuss this in an investor-owned utility, you know, webinar, where investor-owned utilities, they don't have as much of a say. So they don't have that regulatory flexibility where they can decide the extent, you know, to which they are or are not addressing the climate crisis, or they are or not being leaders in the climate crisis. And so I think that, you know, it is important to consider the extent, you know, of climate action as part of energy and environmental justice. And it does fall specifically in what is called climate justice, which is where you're really looking at the burden and the benefits that are gained, or that the benefits and the burden that are taken on by residents and community members, and, you know, to what extent that is equitable. And in particular, this is something called distributional justice, is to what extent are the burdens distributed equitably. And I think this is something that a lot of MLPs can really think about as a component of their policy and strategy to address climate and environmental justice. The fifth recommendation is, as was mentioned, practicing and institutionalizing procedural justice. And I really think that I have a map, but I think that what Johannes laid out is really powerful. Is, you know, when we're talking about procedural justice, we're not talking about just one meeting. We're not talking about just two meetings. It is really a process of engaging with the community, seeking out residents, you know, really pushing and advertising meetings, really pushing and advertising opportunities for residents to weigh into decisions. You know, that's kind of the scale we want. And I think we should all aspire to get closer to that collaboration level, that, you know, involvement level where folks are, you know, where residents are really at the table with general managers, with the light board, making decisions that ultimately impact their community. And this is another breakdown of what procedural justice looks like, but I will defer to Johannes's the graph that Johannes presented in her presentation. So with that, this kind of concludes the presentations portion of the summit. I do want to take a moment to unmute folks, and then if folks have a question or something that they want to talk about, and they want to just go ahead and raise their hand, we will respond to them, and I'll kind of call you out so that you know you're the one to unmute and ask your question. So
Logan,
with that, yep.
I'm sorry, Jerry Halberstad had a question in the chat.
Perfect. I was gonna get to these questions, okay. But thank you for calling it out. So Jerry asks, I would love to hear a short summary of how to organize a community from Jackie. Do you focus on activists? Do you try to engage the broader community?
I think you need, like, it's a multi-pronged thing, and you need to work with everybody you can, right? Which includes activists, but also community members. They're directly impacted, and they're the ones whose voice is going to matter the most if they live in that community, right? And the issue affects them directly. I think that in organizing, I've worked with people on different levels, and it takes multiple, like different things that you have to do to get the attention of folks. That includes getting like media attention, right? Getting the issue to the city council, however, whatever. I know every city and town has different rules for stuff, but however you can do that, I think it's a good way to do that. But there's no list of ways to approach it, because every issue, depending on what community, is different. You know what I mean? So sometimes you have to take a different approach, or you have to do the steps in a different order. But I definitely think that the people's voices, right, getting them on board is critical in any campaign. It may not feel like a campaign. It could be a meeting with 3 people, right? But that group can grow over time. Talking to anyone you can, inviting those folks to a meeting. Like Mireille said something about meeting them where they're at. Let's say some people might be too far to take, to get to your meeting. Then maybe provide a Zoom link for some people, right? That may have childcare issues or that kind of stuff, but you definitely have to try to accommodate folks, as many as you can. And as a community organizer, one thing I've learned is that food always works. So if you feed them, they will come. But yeah, I think that you would engage people on different levels, and you have to adjust your messaging for the different groups of folks you talk to. But what I found in this environmental justice and climate justice, because it's so complicated, it's very science-based, and the terms can be off-putting and intimidating to folks, like it was to me. If you keep it as simple as possible, you might not lose the people that you need the most, which are the folks that are most directly impacted. Does that answer your question, Jerry?
Awesome. Thank you
I'll
so
put
much.
my email and phone number in the chat too, if you'd like to speak more.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Is there anything that anyone else on the panel wants to add? Okay, perfect. So I am going to go to Sudi, and it actually will take me just one moment. So Sudi, you should be able to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good evening, everyone. I wanted to follow up Jerry's question with to all of you, but particularly Jaqueline, the value of translation services, and how do you acquire them, and how do you use them? Because I feel like that's the next step for Breathe Clean North Shores. We had some wonderful individuals who helped us with translating text. But if I'm going to reach out to the communities that we're talking about, I need to have a way to talk to them. And I'll just share one story of being out in front of the market basket collecting signatures. And people would just kind of wave us off like we don't speak English. And I would turn the brochure around and say, well, but we want you to read this anyway. And if I got that far with them, the majority, I'd say 100%, sat down, read the flyer, took time to do everything we asked them. That's a way to be where they are without signaling out a neighborhood. We are where you think and talk. And I'm really interested in getting those services. So my goal is to write some grants, but I really need to know, how important is that? Is anyone else doing it? What are they doing?
I'll say really quickly, and I'm sure others may have something to contribute, that with my organization in particular, we include translation for the events that we believe are gonna need it. that is kind of pricey per hour, right? But if your event is an hour, then it's not. You know what I mean? It depends how long it runs. Some folks, you might be able to find someone to do it at a cheaper price, right? Because they care about the issue. But I think if you had a small budget, you could try to keep the meat of whatever it is you're trying to get out to be translated, opposed to the whole thing from beginning to end, because they do charge per hour. We have made a conscious effort to translate materials. Just about everything we put out, we translate. And for translating like text, you can put it in Google Translate and then get someone to look it over to make the corrections. It does a decent job. But yeah, for in-person or Zoom events, yeah, you should try to get a translation if you know folks are gonna be there that need it, let them know ahead of time, and then get the meat of the meeting translated if
I
a
think
budget is an issue.
translation services are part of the job force we need to create if we're going to be able to really reach
Definitely.
out. And I don't know how to go about that, but whatever I can do to make that happen, because right now I feel like we're not talking to the people who we really need to be talking to, and I don't know how to get to them.
I could ask my coworkers to send me the names and numbers and emails of the folks they've worked with, and I can share that with you. They're more than happy to do it on Zoom. I don't know if they would in person, but definitely over
Zoom
online.
works for me. I'm in Zoom land all the time.
And I think just to quickly add in, to be conscious of time, I think that this is also an issue, and a challenge that municipal utilities are facing, and thinking about, what sort of translations do they need? Who do they send it to in their community? That is a piece of accessibility, and it is definitely a challenging piece, but one that, I think advocates and municipal utilities alike, should really be working on trying to ensure that their materials, that their light board commissions are as accessible as possible. Is there anything else that Mireille or Johannes you want to add to this question?
I mean, really briefly, I can tell some stories about language access failure and how to not do it. We see state agencies grapple with us a lot and fail and fall down and propose half measures that don't really work. Like when you have an in-person meeting with experts, you need to have translation both directions or in as many languages as you have. We've seen the Energy Facilities Siting Board provide translation for the benefit of the agency. Like they will have Spanish to English translation so that people that come and want to say something about a proposal can be understood, but not the other way, so that the attendees can understand what's going on. They need to ensure that the translators understand the technical language if there is technical language going on. Another false solution or half measure that doesn't really work that was proposed was to have translation in another room. So if you're talking about procedural justice and making someone feel like they are part of the process, in a public meeting when things are being discussed, tell them, you need to go into another next door where the meeting will be translated to you via Zoom. Just that kind of, it's a lot of that stuff in retrospect probably seems pretty intuitive, but basically you're trying to make any meeting or any document as accessible, regardless of whatever language the recipient or hearer speaks or reads.
And this is where the brevity and the clarity and simplification of things comes in handy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am going to go. So thank you so much for that, Sudi. I'm going to go to another question. I saw Janet, you had your hand up, or correct me if I'm wrong. I think you're muted.
Okay, this is hard to say, not quite having to do with MLPs, but it has to do with lack of availability or accessibility of some of the transitions to clean energy that low-income people just cannot afford. The most stunning example is, wouldn't it be nice if everybody had an electric car? As vehicular emissions are such an important component. But they're expensive. And so are there enough efforts being made to make electric vehicles more affordable? So there's more chance that somebody would make that switch from a gas-powered car. And along with that is if somebody belongs in a community where you can opt for 100% renewable source of electricity, and they aren't all that way, but there's some where you can, then is it affordable for somebody to get say a heat pump for their house that's, as I say, affordable if they're low income? And the answer is, I'm afraid no, but maybe I'm ignorant of all the benefits that there are available for people who are qualified. Can you tell me if there are, or there ought to be?
Does anyone on the panel want to take this one?
I can't really speak to the electric car piece of things, and I think that's a big investment that's a little bit harder to cover for folks, but definitely an example of the kinds of programs that MLPs can offer is to support folks in electrifying their homes and moving away from gas heating, moving away from gas appliances, et cetera, and supporting that transition to electrification, which also indirectly, can help MLPs in that electricity use is going to increase in coming years as more people electrify their homes. And that's also part of the justice component, because if we aren't supporting lower income folks who can't afford the upfront cost to electrify their homes and to do that sooner rather than later, they're going to be the last customers left on gas, and they're going to be shouldering most of the cost of gas infrastructure at that point. And so making sure that we're not leaving those people behind in being the last ones to get heat pumps, the last ones to get electric, appliances and all that is a really key part of justice as well. So I know that doesn't fully answer your question, Janet, but that's what I can offer. I don't know enough about the incentive programs that currently exist for specifically heat pumps and electric cars.
Okay.
Great.
Right.
Thank you. And I'm seeing that there are a few other questions, so I want to make sure that we have enough time. So I'm going to go to Diane and then to Jackie.
Okay, so this is not a question. This is an answer in part to the last question. So I've been watching this really closely in Shrewsbury, where we have Selco, which was mentioned earlier. It's an MLP. So if you live in Shrewsbury, you're a resident, then all the electricity you get is through Selco. And as a Shrewsbury resident, you can get $500 towards a heat pump as a rebate. But if you also have natural gas to heat your home, and more than at least 50% of your home is heated with natural gas, you can get up to $10,000 from Eversource. So that's a $10,500 towards a heat pump. And there are a number of different kinds of combination rebates like this that are at least available in our town and probably in a number of other MLPs.
That is, and I'm sure Jackie, you will be able to add more to that. I do just want to add that you're absolutely right, and that's something that's very exciting and something that MLP residents should absolutely take advantage of. Is if you're served by gas and the municipal utility. I know there are several municipal utilities that are opting to provide both incentives. Not every municipal utility, but that really makes it a lot easier for you to electrify. If you have both incentives. So I will pass it over to Jackie with that.
So I'll address the electric vehicles to some extent. So Diane knows me. I work for the utility here in Shrewsbury. And, we launched an EV rebate program. And we've got a couple things going for it that specifically tries to address environmental justice issues. One is that we allow you to get a rebate whether you purchase or lease a new or used vehicle up to 5 years old, because used vehicles tend to be more affordable. So in addition to the formula we use to issue the rebate, we also have an income adder, right? So I think it's if you're 80% or lower, then the median income in Worcester County will give you an additional incentive. So we're trying to do those right things and hit environmental justice in different ways.
Yes, great. Thank you. And I think that that's also something, that municipal utilities have been doing and can continue to look at, is as far as, when you're talking about the incentives, it's not always it's going to be harder for lower income residents to adopt some of these, clean technologies. And so making sure that they have sufficient incentives that will enable them to use these programs and these incentives that are available to them is really important. And the way to do that is by increasing those, providing an adder, like Jackie was saying, for various different programs, from heat pumps to electric vehicles, the list goes on. And I think that is a great step that can be taken to advance, energy justice and climate justice. So thank you for that. Any other comments or, questions that folks have? Feel free to, we have time maybe for one or two more. So if you have something, don't be shy and feel free to either raise your hand or to shout it out. I see Missy has her hand up.
Hi, so I'm Missy from Shrewsbury as well. It's like the Shrewsbury Coalition here. But the question, we talked a lot about a lot of accessibility, but one that we didn't really touch a lot on is people with disabilities and with health issues. As we become more electrified, and particularly with people with COVID, long COVID, we're seeing a lot of people with reliance on electrical breathing devices, dialysis, whatever, and the importance of them being able to, stay on their machines and that type of thing. But any programs within the MLPs, addressing their needs, the multilingual needs, so within social justice or EJ communities who also have higher levels of many health issues as well, again, because of where they're living and all that kind of thing. So really tying all that in there as a disability issue as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Does anyone on the panel want to add to that or talk about, some solutions that have been, implemented in other areas, if you have that knowledge? I will just add, I think it's a really important piece, and I think, we need to think inclusively when we talk about communities that are vulnerable, communities that are at risk, communities that do need additional support. And that support, does have to take various different forms. And, from the municipal utility perspective, that local connection, knowing what's happening in your community, knowing where the needs are, is a really wonderful thing, because it allows you to tailor your environmental justice or your justice program or your accessibility program to the needs of the community that you serve. And, that's really, I think a really good first question is asking who is in your community and what needs do they have? And that's how you design, that's why you need that procedural justice component. And that's how you move forward in developing these environmental policies and programs. Anyone want to add to that?
I guess I would say very briefly, it's an incredibly important component. People on ventilators, like that's the last person you want to cut power off from, and the first person you want to make sure continues to have power. And so those assessments are the kinds of things that should absolutely go into considering when and if ever to shut somebody off, somebody's power off. Is there an immediate health consequence there? Do you have a blanket policy over the summer to not cut off power because that's air conditioning and potentially somebody's life that you're threatening there? one more point I was going to make, specifically tying that question to the issue of environmental justice or environmental justice populations, that issue of service restoration after a disruption, it is imperative to prioritize those communities where people are least able to leave or have a backup plan. You know, you might think like, yeah, rich people's ventilators turn off and kill people in the same way that poor people's do, but rich people can have a generator. Rich people can afford to get out of town. Rich people have another, you know, there are intersections here that are really important to keep in mind. And it is at those intersections of vulnerability where, yeah, people's lives are at stake. And I appreciate that question.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And thank you for the question, Missy. I see Jason has his hand up. So go for it, Jason.
Hey, Logan, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for being here.
No, anytime. So I am actually, I have the privilege of being the assistant superintendent over at the Norwood Municipal Light Department. Just to comment a little bit on what Melissa and Johannes was saying. As I'm sure you guys are aware that the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities has a waiver for health issues. So if you file a form, you get put on a list at your utilities, so you can't be shut off as a non-pay. So I figured I'd just give you the heads up on that. There's a couple of things. It's if you have an infant that's 12 months old or younger, I believe, between November 15th and March 15th, and health issues. But the one benefit I wanted to mention that I think gets left a lot of times from an MLP over an IOU is the reliability. I think if you look at our SAIDI, CAIDI safety numbers and compare MLP communities to the surrounding IOU communities, you'll find in storms, and a lot of times it takes a couple of days to get the power back on. When typically MLP, it's back on in a couple hours. I'm assuming Selco is very similar, that you find that your outages when they occur are short duration. So just, I really appreciate all the time you guys took to put the presentation together. Logan and I have a bit of a history. I try to stay as involved as possible in MCAN. We've made some big steps at Norwood. I think we went from 40 to 13 in the last MLP scorecard, and we attempt to keep doing better and better every year. So but that's all. Just if anyone here is from Norwood and wants to reach out to me directly, my contacts on the website, or I could toss it in the chat. But that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you so much, Jason, and thank you for providing that information. I think that it is important that we are aware of, you know, how folks, you know, with those particular needs are served by the state, and likewise, I think that you're absolutely right. The reliability piece is something that MLPs have really been doing a great job in. And it does have environmental and, you know, justice implications in making sure that there are not any, or that the unplanned outages are as short as they can possibly be. So thank you for that. I am conscious that it is 7:33, so I think we will close it. I just want to thank everyone so much for being here, especially the folks who are from municipal utilities. I know these are tough conversations, but this is how we move forward, and we continue to advance these issues, which I think we agree are really, really important. And I want to finish by just thanking again our amazing panelists of speakers. So great to have you here and to learn so much from you all and from your work. So with that, I will close things off, but thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Logan.